they felt about school, how they felt about their families, how they felt about their lives. The United States ranked next to last. The United Kingdom, interestingly, was last. And I think there's a lot of that common law family thing that's been going on that we've all talked about. Italy ranked 10th, in the middle, out of 22. And it was number 1 in family and peer relationships, which is something I've been exploring in my work. What does that mean? How does that sort out? Now, I actually could have and wanted to, in some ways, begin with this graph. Because when I thought about this conference and the issue of, is there a way to harmonize child-centered jurisprudence and feminist jurisprudence? It seemed to me that the place where the most painful and heart-wrenching conflicts exist is in the areas of state intervention in the family for protection of children. That has been that place where tragic choices must be made. And I'm questioning whether they must be made. We have to get to that place. What I have here are two I guess they call them bar graphs. I was looking at statistics. There are so many children who are in foster care in Italy, and there are so many children in foster care in the United States. There are so many children in prison in Italy, and there are so many children in prison in the United States. Well, how does that graph out when you control for the fact that we have a larger population, more children? And this is how it graphs out. The children in Affigo, these are the children in foster care. Now, these are the children in prison. I had to make it really tall so you could even see the Italian children in prison, right? They were so thin there because the drastic difference between the number of children we put into prison and the number of children that are sent to prison in Italy. And so I had to ask myself, and I think we all have to say, obviously this is just because American families are so bad. American families are so bad at taking care of their children that all those children end up in foster care. And American children are so evil. They're so evil that all those children end up in prison. Obviously, there's got to be another reason behind these discrepancies. And I think that's what drew me to looking at the preventive focus that you get when you shift to children's rights to social and economic benefits. I won't go into great detail about healthcare, but I use these comparisons when I'm talking in Europe. And I think now our healthcare system has become much more familiar to Europeans as well. In Italy, there's a universally public funded healthcare system for all children and pregnant women, and it continues to cover children until they're 18. And of course it covers women too, but they may have a copay. No child ever has a copay. Infant mortality is among 10 of the 10 lowest of the 33 countries, OECD countries. And as you know, in the U.S., public health care is limited to the poorest of the poor, and many children lack health care. Infant mortality in the U.S. is higher than all but one of the 33 developed nations. So you can see the outcomes of our healthcare system. These are the outcomes for children and families. I won't dwell on this because I think we all know these horror stories from the U.S. healthcare system. Number of people going into bankruptcy because they can't pay their medical bills, families that are sick. Actually, one of the things that I found in my research that was most problematic was I found a pamphlet that was put out by an organization that was nonprofit that was helping people with critically ill children. They said, well, if your child or young person has a critical illness, we're the parents' organization to help you get through this. And it was heartbreaking reading. I mean, it was kind of like, well, and then when you go into bankruptcy, maybe you can do a bake sale. And it gave data about what happens to families, for example, the 2-year waiting period to get Medicare if you have a critically ill child. And for me, it was appalling, and for people in Italy, it was unbelievable. Italian parental leaves. They're generous paid maternity and paternity leaves, up to 7 months at full pay. they're very concerned in Italy that they don't have sufficient funding to have the public nido, which is it's not daycare, it's education. And again, this is where I love Martha's comment about mandatory education. A recent Supreme Court decision in Italy, or Constitutional Court decision, held that the asilo nido is not daycare, it is education. It is being provided for children, not as a convenience for parents, but for children who have a right to education. But they need to do a lot more because there's waiting lists and they can't serve all the children. But over 95% of children aged 3 to 6 attend public scuola materna, open from 8:30 to 5:30, 3 hot meals, 2 snacks, and a hot meal. I'm looking at how much the state pays on children's lunches. You know, what do they actually defray of the expenses? And the answer is the cost of the state for every child's lunch is about $7. In the United States, where we have reduced and free lunches, the cost that is actually paid is something like $1.15 or $1.25. That's what we're feeding our children. Right, comparative. Again, when you looked at the multi-generational family, one of the things I kept hearing is grandmothers are on those committees that decide what the children get fed. And one of the grandmothers said to me, when I go to school, I taste the food. I taste the food, and it's pretty good, yeah. So part of this involvement. I'm not going to talk about the homeschool hospital. I can see I'm running out of time, but it's an example of one of the things that was generated by the focus on children's rights. Children's rights to health care and to education. The Italians felt they were falling behind in this area, so they implemented legislation that addressed this in what I think is a very creative way. But one of the sort of conundrums that I've encountered in working in this area, looking at the ecology of childhood in Italy, is that there's a very low birth rate there. We know that raising the well-being of women through access to education, economic development, and employment reduces birth rates. But what's happening in Europe is that birth rates have fallen so far, particularly in Italy and southern Italy, that they're no longer replacing their population, and that's considered a great crisis. So I have to ask myself, why is Italy, with child-friendly policies, faced with low birth rates? Because they have established that women would like to have more children than they do in Italy. And the answer here, again, this is kind of drawing the full circle to feminism. It's the work-family balance. Research suggests that birth rates stabilize at appropriate levels when men and women share in parenting and when parents have access to work in the wage economy with flexible hours and good child care options. So I think that, again, a world fit for children is a world fit for everyone. It's a world where women have freedom to work and job security and the ability to take time when they need it for their children. Eco-generous policies. What does this all, where do I come out here in terms of thinking, does eco-generism make a difference in what kinds of policies we would promote? We would certainly promote access to employment for women, funding to assist communities. We'd promote gender equality in domestic labor, and provide supports for poor children and families. I also, as I was thinking about these, in fact, just before the presentation, I realized I had left something out here. I left out people who don't have children. But people who don't have children are an integral part of this because, again, vulnerability, that concept. The people who don't have children are going to be vulnerable at various times in their lives. And the support of people who choose to be childless or not to have children is very important to their own future because at some point in the future these children will be wage-earning adults who will be helping to support the people who don't have children to come into the picture. So anyway, my comparative analysis, I've come up with some preliminary conclusions. This is all still very preliminary. But that there is a positive correlation between recognition of children's social and economic rights and supportive programs. I kept hearing over and over again when I would ask, well, for example, why don't you don't pay as much for you pay a fee to the school to help go on school trips, right? But there are parents who don't pay that fee. And do their children go on the trips? Because I've sat in schools where children did not go on the trips because their parents hadn't paid. Oh, of course, all children go. All children have a right. All children have a right. So this notion of rights as being supportive of social and economic